Introduction to Object-Oriented Programming. In today's session, we are going to learn Introduction to Object-Oriented Programming Language. Before that, there is some history given for programming language. What do you mean by programming language? We have to learn the basic concepts of Object-Oriented Programming Language, where we will learn the definition of OOP. What do you mean by objects? What do you mean by classes? What is the use of real-time entity in the form of object-oriented part? What are the advantages of the object-oriented programming? And we will see the difference between procedural programming language and object-oriented programming language. And the last part we will go for concluding. Programming languages. First of all, we want to understand what is the need of programming language and what are the different types of programming language. So basically, programming languages allows programmer to develop the software. Through this programming language, we can give the instruction to the computers, and according to that, computer gives me the output. So for the purpose, we have seen there are three major families or can consider the types of programming languages. One is machine language, second one is assembly language, and third one is high-level language. High-level languages. In computer science, a high-level programming language is a programming language with a strong abstraction from the details of the computer. High-level languages represent a giant leap towards easier programming. The syntax of high-level language is similar to English. For example, if I want to pay gross pay, then there is a formula basic pay plus overtime pay. So I have to define a normal variable, say for example gross pay, and by using the operator plus, I can add base pay with the gross overtime pay and I can get the gross pay. Now let's understand the concept of interpreters. So interpreters executes high-level language program without compilation. That means it converts your high-level language into machine understandable language. Basically, we divide high-level language into two groups: procedural programming language and object-oriented programming language. Procedural languages. Early high-level languages are typically called procedural languages. Procedural languages are characterized by sequential set of linear commands. The focus of such languages is on structure. That means it is a structured programming language. We have seen the C programming language. This is a structured programming language, one of the type of example of procedural language. There are few examples I mentioned over here. One is COBOL, Fortran, Lisp, Perl, HTML, VB scripts. These are all called procedural programming language. Object-oriented languages. The focus of OOP languages is not on structure but on modeling the data. Programmers code using blueprints of the data models called classes. We have seen some examples of object-oriented programming languages, which includes C++, Visual Basic.NET and Java. So in this slide, I have mentioned the difference between the structured programming language and object-oriented programming language. So in structured programming language, methods define the structure of the programs. They are basic building blocks. Data has secondary role. It is just something that is passed around. Where in object-oriented programming language, the data has the principal role, that is primary role of the data is to be given in object-oriented programming language. Method belongs to the data. Without data, the method does not have any meaning. There are some exceptions are to be there, which is nothing but static methods. Data and methods together make up the objects. Object-oriented programming tries to model the real world. Now, what does the real world look like? So we will see with the help of examples in the next slide. So let's start with our concept, which is nothing but introduction to OOP, which is nothing but introduction to object-oriented programming. What is object-oriented programming? Object-oriented programming is mainly a program design philosophy. Object-oriented programming uses a different set of programming languages than old procedural languages, for example C, Pascal, etc. Everything in object-oriented programming is grouped as self-sustainable objects. Hence, you gain reusability by means of four main object-oriented programming concepts, which is nothing but encapsulation, inheritance, abstraction, and polymorphism. So in object-oriented programming, programmers define not only the data type of the data structure but also the type of operations or methods. Methods are nothing but functions that can be applied to the data structure. In this way, the data structure becomes an object that includes both data and methods in one unit. In addition, programmers can create relationship between one object and another. For example, objects can inherit characteristics from other objects. It is one type of characteristics of inheritance which is given by OOP. The real world can be accurately described as a collection of objects that interacts. This is a key idea in object-oriented programming. The world is nothing but a set of things which is called as real-world entities, where we can see the objects everywhere in the world. For example, I mention here some type of objects in the real world: books, chair, home, lamp, etc. We can see everywhere in the world. So these are nothing but objects have states which describes the entities. Here in this slide I am describing the entity with the help of example. Here I am describing the particular person. For example, the gym shows in picture. She is very happy. Pencil is lying down in a ground, which are nothing but the states of the objects. In this slide, I am defining some objects which have some behavior. For example, if I want to introduce myself, then I have to say, "Hello, I am John." With the response from the other part, I can get, "Nice to meet you." So this is nothing but objects which have some behavior. Object-oriented programming basic terminology. So it consists of object, methods. Methods consist of action performed by an object, which is nothing but a verb. If I consider object, usually a person which plays a things, which is called as a noun in form of OOP. If I consider property or attribute, then it is nothing but characteristics of certain object. Now, I told you that the object-oriented programming language were divided into objects and classes. So if I consider class, it is a category of similar objects such as automobiles, which does not hold any value of the object's attributes or properties. And if I say object, so object is nothing but an instance of the class. So now we are going to learn the concept of classes and objects in object-oriented programming language. So what is class in object-oriented programming language? So class is a basic building block of OOP. Once a class has been defined, we can create any number of objects belonging to that class. Now I told you that what is mean by object. So objects are nothing but instance or variables of type class. Objects has real existence and take up space in the memory. When a program is executed, the objects interacts by sending messages to one another. Each object contains data and code to manipulate the data. What do you mean by object properties? Now, object is an abstraction of real-world entity. Here I define one example of real-world entity, which is nothing but object which consider as lamp. If I consider object properties, then we have to understand these three concepts: identity, state, and behavior. So if I go through this particular example, then the identity is nothing but lamp. When I consider its state, it may be either in two states. One is my behavior I have to consider by just considering the lamp is on or lamp is off. So if I consider objects properties, then it is nothing but object is an abstraction of real world entity. So let's understand the concept of objects. So an object represents something with which we can interact in a program. An object provides a collection of services that we can tell it to perform for us. The services are defined by methods in a class that defines the object. A class represents a concept and an object represents embodiment of a class. A class can be used to create multiple objects. Let's understand the object and classes with the help of this example. A class can be used to create multiple objects. So here I define a class which is called as a bank account, which creates multiple objects from the same class. So I define John's bank account, Bill's bank account, and Maria's bank account, and these are nothing but an object. An object represents something with which we can interact in a program. In object-oriented programming, problem is divided into number of entities called objects and then builds a data and function members around these objects. It ties the data more closely to the functions that operate on it and protects it from accidental modification from the outside functions. Data of an object can be accessed only by the functions associated with that object. Communication of the objects done through the functions. So let's summarize all these points now. Object-oriented programming was introduced to overcome flaws in the procedure approach to the programming, such as lack of reusability and maintainability. Fundamental idea behind object-oriented programming language is to combine into a single unit both data and functions that operate on that data. Such a unit is called as an object. So in this diagram, I represent classes and objects. So classes are nothing but which consist of class properties belongs to the class and it has some methods which is nothing but functions of the class. If I consider objects are nothing but instance of that particular class which has its own instance properties which belongs to which object. So in this slide I define a simple class bicycle, which has its own data members and member functions. A class is a definition of object with the same properties and same methods. So here I define some data members which is nothing but, for example, integer speed, integer gear. So these are all called as data members of class bicycle, where I define member functions which is nothing but grid, change gear, speed up or apply brakes. These are all called as properties of the particular class, or you can say methods of the particular class bicycle. So let's differentiate between procedure-oriented programming language and object-oriented programming language. So in this slide I define procedure-oriented programming language. So the procedure programs is divided into functions. Each function has clearly defined purpose and a clearly defined interface to the other function in a program. The idea of breaking a program into functions can be further extended by grouping a number of functions together into a large entity called a module. So in procedure-oriented programming language, it accepts top-down approach. It is a process of breaking the overall procedure or task into components or modules and then subdivide each component modules until the lowest level of the detail has been reached. So this is nothing but structure programming language, a structure of procedure oriented programming. Let's understand the key characteristics of procedure oriented programming. It encompasses with the help of algorithms, which is nothing but it is a structure programming language where the structure is fixed. Large programs are divided into small programs known as functions. Most of the functions share global data as data is defined globally. Data move openly around the system from function to functions. Functions transforms data from one form to another and which consists of top-down approach for the designing part. So let's understand what is the drawback of procedure-oriented programming. Since every function has complete access to global variables, so there is a violation of data can be occur, which is nothing but the new programmer can corrupt the data accidentally by creating the functions. We can access the data of one function from other since there is no protection. In large program, it is very difficult to identify what data is used by which function. Similarly, if new data is to be added, all the functions needed to be modified to access the data. And it does not model real world problem very well. So in procedure oriented programming, multifunction programs, important data items are placed as global so that they may be accessed by all functions. Each function may have its own local data which consider as if I access other function can access the other function's global data, then this is also a drawback of procedure oriented programming where data violation comes into existence. In object oriented programming, problem is divided into number of entities called objects and then builds data and functions around these objects. So it ties the data more closely to the functions that operates on it and protects it from accidental modification from outside functions. Data of an object can be accessed only by the functions associated with that object. Also, communication of objects done through functions only. So here there are some key characteristics of object-oriented programming I have mentioned. Object-oriented programming encompasses or consists of data rather than procedure. Programs are divided into entities known as object. Data structures are designed such as they characterize the objects. Functions that operate on data of an object are tied together in data structures. Data is hidden from and cannot be accessed by external functions. Objects communicate with each other through functions. New data and functions can be easily added whenever necessary. Also, it follows a bottom-up design in programming designing part. So let's summarize all these points. Object-oriented programming is a programming paradigm based on the concept of objects which can contain data in the form of fields, also known as attributes or properties, and code in the form of procedures, which is also known as methods. There are some features of object-oriented programming we have to mention, which consist of objects and classes. So this language which supports object-oriented programming typically use inheritance for code reuse and extensibility in the form of either classes or prototypes. So if I consider class, so classes is nothing but the definition for the data format and the available procedures for a given type or class of objects. When you consider objects are nothing but instance of class. Objects sometimes corresponds to the things found in the real world. For example, a graphics program may have objects such as circle, square, menu. An online shopping system might have objects such as shopping cart, customer, and product. Sometimes object represents more abstract entities, like an object that represents an open file, or an object that provides the services of translating measurement from US customary to metrics. So these are some questions based on the above topic. So first question is, define object-oriented programming with suitable example. Second one, what is object? Explain it with example. What is classes in object-oriented programming? Explain it with suitable example. Explain procedural programming language. Next one, and the last one is differentiate between procedural language and object-oriented programming language.